All right, well, I have a really high value packed masterclass to go over with you guys tonight. I spent a lot of time taking a lot of different notes from different workshops and seminars that I've attended over the past decade to kind of encapsulate as dense but as informative of a masterclass I can share with you guys on effective communication techniques that not only can work in your day-to-day life, whether that's like in interpersonal conversations that you have with other people, that's loved ones, with people at work and your career, but kind of the main goal of what tonight is about is we're going to be analyzing communication through the lens of interpersonal communication, analyze how that works and why it works when it does, and then try to apply that to the inner self, to essentially there's a lot of different, we'll get into specifics, but we're basically going to translate that and reverse engineer communication that works to communicate with aspects of ourself. And there's a really good reason to do that. It's because when you have the inner level of experience all in alignment with the same goals, the same intent, you can create some pretty magical things can begin to happen in your life. And that has to do with people that you attract, the type of just really the reality that you begin manifesting, that when you have your higher self, your unconscious mind, your conscious awareness all working towards the same goal, you can do some pretty amazing things. But first, before you can even get to that stage, you have to be able to communicate with those parts of yourself. So that's what tonight's really about. It's about breaking down communication. And we're going to start pretty basic, but it's kind of important to start basic because we need to see how communication breaks down and also why it works in the everyday life, and then transpose that over to the inner world, the inner level experience, which it does actually, it does shift over very easily. And at the very end, we'll be doing a pretty cool exercise, I think. Something that I use regularly that's been very helpful, that communicates with the inner level of experience. So anyway, I'm going to swap over my cam here because I have a bunch of slides for you guys tonight. But before we get into the rest of the masterclass tonight, I'm just going to do a quick, brief bio about myself. Who am I? If this is our first time meeting, I'm Brett Stuart. Thanks for showing up to this class tonight. I work as an intuitive development coach. I kind of wear a number of hats. I'm a remote viewing instructor. I teach intuition-based techniques here in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, as well as through my website, technicalintuition.com. And I'm also author of Remote Viewing, the Complete Guide, which was, I would say, I started this journey back in 2010, and that occurred when I had a number of pretty, what I would call reality-breaking experiences that kind of changed my whole perception of this reality that we're living in. And it kind of sent me looking for answers in places that I hadn't been looking previously. My history before that, I was a character animator and artist, went to art school. And then even before that, I went to school for political science. So I was very much head in the books, materialistic, objective-based reality only. I don't care about this subjective stuff at all in, I would say, my early 20s. But then I had just experience after experience in a very short window of time that really changed my perspective. I just had so many questions because of all these things that were happening around me. And that led me to a number of different workshops and seminars on things like meditation, to mindfulness, to remote viewing, to intuition, and just a whole bunch of different fields. And kind of the thing that a lot of you guys probably know me through is my YouTube channel, obviously, which I'm streaming on right now, Technical Intuition YouTube channel, where I've been historically done like a lot of remote viewing related videos. And also even on my website, it's teaching remote viewing was kind of been my main path up to this point for instruction. But this year, I really just had this passion begin sharing this whole other journey that I've been taking. I just really haven't been public about up to this point, which is more of an inner journey. It's more of all of the experience and working with different spiritual mentors to figure out essentially what's going on the inner level of experience, how to communicate with it, how to work with it, and then also how to basically shine that outwards in the world and manifest kind of the reality that I want to live in my day-to-day life. And a lot of that has to do with dealing with your emotional baggage. And it's a whole big journey, which I've had thus far. But, I've gotten to a point, almost a decade of doing this and pursuing these type of things, that at the beginning of this year, I really just had this eagerness to share this with a larger audience beyond just the remote viewing stuff. But even if you're a remote viewer and that's what you do, which is great because I do it all the time too, these are techniques that are very useful to remote viewers because, being able to communicate with the unconscious mind, being able to communicate on the inner level is a very handy tool when you're trying to troubleshoot things that when your intuition is off or when your remote viewing data results aren't what you want them to be. And so if you can develop that dialogue, that avenue for dialogue, I found it can be very, very helpful to overcome a lot of the hurdles that you run into when you're trying to use intuition in practical ways in your day-to-day life. So anyway, that's just a short background, a little bit about me before we jump into this masterclass. But let's take a look at the masterclass. Effective communication on inner dialoguing. I just want to do a quick topics at a glance so you know where we're going for this next hour. What I'll be discussing is first, we're going to talk just about communication, the basics of communication. And it may seem a little fundamental, but it's an important starting place because everything that we do after that builds from there. So I'm going to be talking about that. And next, we're going to be talking about digging a little deeper on the arc of effective communication. Because the thing about communication is anyone can talk, right? And most people would think that just speaking at someone is communicating. But there's a difference between sending a message to someone and effectively sending a message to someone. So our key focus is about effective communication, how that works and why that works. I'm going to break down kind of the key fundamentals that are required for that and the arc that essentially occurs once that is happening properly. So we're going to move to that second. Next, we're going to go into the 7 key ingredients for effective communication to take place. Now, this thing, there's actually a lot of exercises for all of these 7 different ingredients, but we only have 1 hour or so to go over it all. So we're not going to get into all the exercises, but just knowing about them should and has helped me on my day-to-day life to start applying them in real time when I'm interacting with other people. And then at the same time, once we get to the inner level, you can apply them there as well. So we're going to jump to that next. After that, I did want to incorporate some pretty cool scientific research that is coming out of the HeartMath Institute, which has to do with heart-based coherence techniques that are associated with the emotional body, with communication, and a number of different things. And it's also to kind of lay a foundation for the technique I want to show you guys at the end of this masterclass, which is how to use the heart as an avenue to connect with the inner aspects of yourself, to communicate with that as the freeway, if you will. And there's some really pretty amazing scientific research that's been done on that particular field that you likely haven't heard about. So I definitely want to show you guys some of the research that's coming out of there. And then, as I just mentioned, where we're going to end up is the exercise, is to give you a practical tool that you can use at the end of this class in your everyday life. And it's something I've used that I know works, that can have dramatic effects on your day-to-day life as far as affecting your productivity in your day, affecting your communication with your inner and outer worlds throughout your day. And even just, we'll get to it, but it's a very effective technique, essentially, that I want to show you guys at the end of the class. So anyway, as we jump into it, I think a good place to start, I always like to do this with my live streams, just start with a quote. And it's something that I think is good to kind of kick it off. And this is from Stephen R. Covey, who's an author. And the quote is, "The biggest communication problem is we do not listen to understand. We listen to reply." And the reason why I find this quote so interesting and applicable to this masterclass is because one of the root causes for so much communication, or rather miscommunication, and a whole host of other problems that plague dialoguing with others or internal self, has to do with this idea of really not understanding the core principle of why we want to communicate in the first place, which is to gain understanding. We're always ready to burst out with our own opinion or something else. And it's almost like because of that, we put a block up to the whole understanding and listening aspect, which is essential if we want to have effective communication take place. So especially in today's modern age, this is really rather prevalent. And I can be guilty of this myself even. So it's, when we're aware of this though, we can kind of regulate it and make sure we don't do it. But I thought it was a kind of a good place to start. So to jump in, number one, I think the starting place is what and why of communication. And this is going to be a little basic, but it's basic intentionally. So just hang on with me here. But I want to talk about the what of communication. And so to start with that, what is it? Communication is the act of transferring information from one place to another. Okay, pretty basic. Everyone kind of gets that probably. But even though this is a simple definition, when we think about how we communicate, the subject actually becomes a lot more complex because there's actually a lot of different venues or avenues for this to take place. For example, it can take place on the spoken and the verbal levels. This is like face-to-face communication, telephone, radio, television. This masterclass, for example, is a verbal communication. But you have three other ones as well. You also have nonverbal communication, which ends up with body language, gestures, how we even dress in public is a type of nonverbal communication. Even our scent can affect it as well. So that's another avenue that this can occur. And then you have written communication as well, emails, books, you guys understand that. Visualizations as well, type of communication, graphs, charts, maps, things like that, which communicate certain types of messages. So even though it's just a transfer of information, there's a whole host of avenues this can come through. But knowing that, what's the goal, the why of communication? Why do we communicate? Well, the desired outcome of any communication, as I alluded to at the beginning with the quote, is the goal of communication process is understanding and agreement as to the meaning of what's being communicated. That's the goal, is to get across the understanding, and it's a agreed upon understanding. If I'm saying words and the way they're being interpreted is if I say blue and you think red, that's not very helpful, right? We need to have an agreement on the understanding of what's being communicated, which is part of the goal of it. So knowing this though, then, okay, the what and the why, that's basic. You guys understand this stuff. You're humans, right? Well, I hope. But the next logical step then is how. How does communication work? And here's where the hangups begin. Here's where the errors begin to plague us, because it's unlikely you've seen this actually laid out in a diagrammatic form before. So I'm going to do that for you. Moving on to the next slide. This is the step-by-step process required for effective communication to occur. So again, as we already talked, first you need a sender, of course, right? But that sender needs to encode their message in a way across a channel. And we just described all those different types of channels. You have the verbal, the nonverbal, etc., all the different ones. But the thing though is that the channel is actually rather important. Because, if you have, the silly one is, if you're trying to communicate to a dog, you're not going to use math, right? So it's like you need to choose the right channel for the intention that you have originally. So moving to the next step of communication, the next step is that the encoded message that you send is delivered to a receiver, or in this case, this masterclass, there's a bunch of you guys, multiple receivers. And then your job on the other end of the screen is to decode the communicated message, right? And the thing about the decoding process is it's not inert. It's not static. People filter communication through all sorts of things, from their emotions, their biases, memories, a whole host of things. And so it's almost a never one-to-one translation from what's going on up here to what's ending up over there. Obviously, the more effective you are at communication, the better that translation rate ends up being. But here's the interesting thing about this diagram about communication is that most people believe this is it, that this is the end of communication process, that if they're transmitting a message, an idea, that they did their part. Say you're the sender. It's that, it's not my fault if the other end of the tube doesn't get it, right? I did my best job to send the information over there. And then that's the end, the hang up essentially at that point. But the issue, if that's the perspective you have about communication, is that what you're doing is you're not actually completing the circuit, because effective communication is actually a circular thing. And it looks something like this. It goes to the sender, over to the receiver, but then the receiver sends feedback, which then has to be encoded as well, goes back through another channel. It might be verbal, it might be nonverbal, it might be a whole host of things. And then the sender, whoever's intending to send a message to someone or communicate effectively to someone, has to pick up on that. So they have to decode that feedback. Now, obviously, it's a little bit difficult in a masterclass online for me to do that. This is why I specify a specific Q&A session at the end so that I can work with you guys one-on-one, answer questions directly. But right now, actually, it's very difficult for me to effectively communicate with the entire audience here because there's no feedback signals that I have. However, in real time, when you're having a conversation, whether it's with a coworker or your partner or whatever it is, those are signals that are constantly, typically being sent. And if you aren't aware and conscious to pick up on those signals, how effective your communication is going to be much less than if you were paying attention to those. And I'll get into reasons why in just a minute. But one of the things is, and everyone's kind of experienced this. It's like, for example, how many times have you had a conversation with someone where you tried to communicate an idea, but you just couldn't get it through their thick skulls, right? Like everyone's had that to some extent, and this is where there is a failing to transmit it from what's up here to over there. And that could have occurred anywhere along that process. From you maybe were unable to encode it properly, maybe you used the wrong channel, or maybe the individual just was incapable of decoding what you were trying to tell them, right? That's perhaps one place the error could have occurred. But it might have been on the other side too, because here's the other common occurrence. Is how many times have you thought that you communicated clearly to somebody else, say a set of instructions, but later on only to find out that their wiring got crossed, that they misheard you. Not that they didn't hear words you said, they just misinterpreted what you said and therefore didn't proceed to do what you had asked of them. It's like, well, what happened there is it may have been an issue on their decoding end of things, but it likely also was as a result of your failure to pick up on the feedback signals properly as well. Because as a communicator, there's a role that you have as well. It's almost like a leadership role that you take on to make sure that the person you're communicating with gets it. And if you're not checking for those feedback signals, you're essentially not upholding your leadership responsibility in this very simple act of communication. So, but there's actually another interesting thing about this feedback loop, if you will. And this has to do with the concept of acknowledgement. And the thing about being acknowledged is that on an emotional level, what it does is it makes you feel valuable. It makes you feel safe. And it creates feelings of being understood with really no reason to say more. And however, this is important to distinguish between giving agreement to someone. It's like you can acknowledge that if your loved one comes home after a difficult day and they are telling you about all these horrible things that happened during the day. They were dumped a whole bunch of, their lap. They got 20 projects they have to go through now and they don't have time and they're stressed and their coworkers are awful. It's like you can acknowledge their communication with I see what you mean, or I hear you, right? You're giving feedback signals to them as they're presenting this information to you. They're communicating these emotional messages typically to you, right? But just because you acknowledge it doesn't mean you necessarily agree with it. I mean, in fact, maybe what may be going on, say in your mental processes as you're hearing this is that, well, maybe you should have seen this coming down the road because you knew that this was going to happen if you didn't do X, Y, Z. Maybe all that's still there, right? But acknowledgement is different than going into agreement of, oh, yes, oh, it was you. It's simply, though, acknowledging that you hear them. And that's a very important thing, because acknowledgement has another property too, other than just feeling valuable and safe. It also relieves tension in the communication process. You see, at the start of the communication circuit, say you ask a question or you give a task to somebody else. You're encoding a message and you're sending it to this other person, right? When you do that, you're left in a state of wondering if you're going to get an answer, right? You've sent out the question. Are they going to respond? Or if you give someone a task, are they going to do the task? You're in a state of tension now after doing that. And now let's assume that the person that you did this communicated, they gave you the answer, or they did the job. Now, certainly that person is going to wonder if it was sufficient, right? And so while your tension may then be relieved because you got the answer, they're now in a state of tension because they want to kind of know now, was this right? So the moment you give acknowledgement to them, a sigh of relief can be had both on your end of the spectrum and on their end. And so the arc of communication, if you will, this circuit, once it closes the loop, it goes from a state of tranquility, if you will. There's no ask, there's no send or need that's going on. Then once the message is sent, it goes through various states of action and emotional tension until finally, where it's completed, you're back in a state of tranquility. So it's the full process. The problem is so often these days is you never end up with acknowledgement because feedback is never given in the communication process. And people are just left in tension, this constant state of anxiety of, I'm not sure if he understands what I mean. And the other person is not sure whether or not they did what was asked of them or what have you. And so kind of understanding how this feedback loop works, how this arc of communication works is a very important part, especially when we want to start using this to dialogue with our inner self. But obviously, if you want to use this kind of knowledge in your interpersonal relationships, it's very valuable on that side of the spectrum too. So moving forward, how do we elicit this feedback? And I think a valuable way would be to look through the lens of an example here of where there's a failure or breakdown in communication, and for this masterclass, specifically on the unconscious level or the inner plane. So I briefly mentioned this actually in the past webinar that I did, but I want to use the example of New Year's resolutions because, is anyone still working on one this year? Because you see, when you start a New Year's resolution, it's January 1st, it's a new year. And, you're pumped, you're ready to go. You got this New Year's resolution, and it may have been the same New Year's resolution that you've had for the past 5 years, but this time it's different, right? And so maybe it's something like in the picture here where you want to hit the gym multiple times a week. You haven't really been quite as active with your body that you would like to do, you'd like to be. And but the thing that happens with New Year's resolutions, and maybe this has even happened to you this year, is eventually it tapers out. That drive or that motivation that you had when you started it, that dream you had of, yes, if only I could hit the gym 3 times a week for every week for the next 6 months, oh, my life would be so much better. Like that's my dream. That's my intent, right? For the next year. Is it eventually just becomes too hard and it becomes too difficult. And their willpower eventually wanes out and they have to give up that dream. And see, the way this relates to communication on the inner level of experience is that, think about it from this perspective. For, say this was a New Year's resolution you had for a number of years and you just weren't able to act on it. For all of that time, past 5 years, maybe even your entire life, what message had you been communicating to the inner level of experience, to, let's just say, the unconscious mind, by not going to the gym? Every time you think about the gym, what happens? You think, it's like, oh, that would be pretty awful. Going to the gym? What? I'd have to change my diet. I don't want to do that. I like food. It tastes good, right? I don't have to change what I eat. And then you might think, oh, and then people might stare at me. I don't want to do that. It's like, so there's another reason not to go. And then you have, maybe it's the showers or something, like gross gym showers. I'll pass. Thank you very much. Right. It's like all of the excuses or the reasons or the thoughts or the emotional responses that have run around in your mind on a mental level about actually acting on that intent has been communicated to the unconscious because of the simple repetition of it time after time after time. And so what do you think are the odds that this time the unconscious is actually going to believe you, that this time it's going to take you seriously, that going to the gym is actually what it thinks you want, because you spent all this time communicating to it that you didn't want to go to the gym, that it would be awful in all these different ways. And it believed you because it had no other reason not to believe you, right? And so this one time that you decided, because, maybe it was a booze-filled night and everyone made their resolution and you're like, yeah, let's get in shape. It's like, it didn't stick. And see, that's a problem of communication breakdown with the inner level of experience, the unconscious mind. And the thing is that if you had the ability to communicate, to get its attention, if you had a technique that essentially showed it that no, regardless of what I've done in the past, this is actually what I really mean, that's kind of what would be required. And that's the actual example, that's the exercise I'm going to show you guys how to use at the end of this masterclass. So, but the thing is, this also needs feedback, is, the feedback that you've given the unconscious mind is feedback of gym bad, don't do, right? And so what happens with New Year's resolutions is, ultimately the inner self, the unconscious mind is not in charge of your life. You're at the wheel. Ultimately, you're always the one responsible for what you're doing day in and day out. However, the unconscious aspect of yourself, the higher mind, certainly influences it. But when there's a disconnect, when the unconscious or the higher self is in disagreement for whatever reason with your conscious desires, your conscious intentions, that's a problem. Because then the only way you're actually going to have something work out is by brute force. It's by sheer willpower to override all the unconscious, I really don't want to go. And that's what happens with New Year's resolutions. Is that people, they go for a couple weeks, whatever the resolution was, and then they give it up because their willpower runs out, because the inner part of themselves isn't in alignment with their conscious intention. And so learning to communicate is really a key fundamental thing to actually having that take place in your life and actually creating and manifesting positive changes in your life that you want to see. So I think it was a really effective example to kind of show the disconnect and how it can happen. The next slide I want to jump to here now is the 7 ingredients for effective communication. And this is something that you can apply in basically all forms, whether it's on the inner or outer levels of experience. But I did want to share these with you guys because I think if you look at them through these lenses, it can be very, very helpful. And it was very, very helpful for me when I began to try and kind of up my game at being able to communicate with others in real time. So I'm definitely going to start out with these, and hopefully you guys will find them useful as well. So to begin with, the first ingredient to create effective communication is centeredness and serenity. And I talked about tranquility a little bit as far as in the arc or the circuit of effective communication. But what I'm talking about here as far as centeredness in your communication, this is the idea that from the outset, before communication even begins, that you're comfortable and relaxed with yourself. And this is really an important point, because how many times have you, maybe you've experienced this, but you've tried to communicate with someone that just couldn't hear what you were trying to say, not necessarily because what you're trying to say was complicated or even controversial necessarily, but it was because they were so insecure about their own self that they couldn't stop to listen to you because they were so busy looking at themselves, worrying about themselves. Oh, is my hair out of order? There's something in my teeth, It's like, was my breath bad? It's like they're constantly like looking inwards as opposed to looking at the person that's trying to communicate to them. And so to effectively communicate, you have to be able, at least temporarily, this doesn't mean that you have your entire life in order necessarily to be able to effectively communicate, right? It's like at least temporarily hold this idea of centeredness when you communicate to the other person, so that you can turn the camera onto them, look for the feedback responses without, having to constantly look at yourself to double check all these different things, because it will get in the way. So that's one of the first key ingredients for effective communication. Second key ingredient is attentiveness and alertness. And to be honest, this is probably the most obvious ingredient. If I'm checking my phone or I have a stray thought or I get lost in my own stray thought, communication undoubtedly in those cases doesn't happen, right, when you're distracted. So attentiveness and alertness obviously are key ingredients, but this also comes into play when we bring in the feedback signals, though. I have the picture of the eye, the looking. And this is like the looking at the person that you're trying to communicate with to show them that you are alert, that you are paying attention to them in the communication interaction. And when no one gives you eye contact, it's like, it's almost like, well, are they hiding something? But it's like at the same time, though, the reverse can be true if you have this dead stare directly into their eyes, that zombie stare that could be a little creepy a little bit. So, it's like finding the right balance, right? It's like, yes, I'm paying attention to you. No, I'm not trying to be a creep by keeping this locked gaze, but it is making eye contact when you speak. It is doing that. And it does give a signal of being attentive and aware to the other person you're having an interaction with. Third key ingredient is composure. And this is different than centeredness, because what I mean by composure, and I just have the picture of the mountain there, is that this instead relates to incoming signals from someone else, an exterior source, and your response to them. And it's important because what this is an outward composure that you have whenever something's directed your way that maybe is an attempt to topple you. And especially this occurs in heated conversations or in things that are politically sensitive, or, as we live in a very partisan, I'll get to that in a minute. There's another thing that's related to this, but, it's like whatever comes your way, you are immovable. It will not sway you. And if you're able to hold that, again, if not just temporarily for the interaction, it's an incredibly powerful thing and it creates very effective communication. Okay, the next ingredient is direction and intensity. So what do I mean by this? I mean, first of all, direction is when someone is talking about the other person. It's very intense, like I mean you in this instance. And so it's kind of the direction, the intensity level, but intensity is a kind of thing that's not always just volume. It's like, can you hear me now? It's like yelling at people typically doesn't work very well. So I don't necessarily mean loudness, but it can mean enthusiasm. It can mean your energy level. The best communicators typically have that. And they usually have that because when they're communicating, they're passionate about whatever it is that they're trying to get across to another individual. So it shows up in their body language. It shows up non-verbally. It shows up verbally. And when like how like annoying is it, if you will, maybe that's the wrong word, when you're trying to have a dialogue with someone and they're just droning and they have no enthusiasm, no intensity. It's like, why you bother, right? It's like people don't want to communicate when you're about something with you, if that's your level of intensity. So if you can bring that up a level, even if it's, again, just temporary, it's something that can effectively improve your communication. Number 5 ingredient is, and this might be a hard one, especially in today's climate, but this has to do with appreciation and respect. We live in a time where topics of conversation are definitely, as I mentioned previously, becoming more and more partisan. And it's no matter what side you're on, though, in this particular ingredient, is that if this goes out the window, if respect for the person that's trying to communicate, or respect for the person you're trying to communicate to goes out the window, the communication effort goes along with it. It's really just that simple. No one's going to listen to someone who feels like they're putting them down. Nobody's going to do it. And so if you value the communication process, you have to be able to create a space where you have appreciation and respect for the other person. This doesn't mean respect for their opinions. It doesn't mean respect or appreciation for their ideas or whatever those are, right? That's not the purpose of what this means. This means as an individual, as another person, it's respect for them to come to the table to talk. That's what you're appreciating. You're appreciating their ability to do that, and you're giving them respect because they can do that. Now, they may be crazy and, like, in your opinion, right, and have a whole bunch of nonsensical ideas, which is fine, right? you can still acknowledge the communication. This is why it was important earlier. You can acknowledge a communication that comes in without agreeing with it, right? And that relieves their tension. It also completes the circuit. So, but this is really a key important thing to communication. It's something that's so easily lost these days, where it's just, left and right, Republican and Democrat, it's like all these different, it's just a nightmare because, well, a lot of people don't do this anymore. And it's a wonder why people don't hear each other. So it's a very important ingredient. Number 6 is perseverance and determination. And this is an interesting one because this is a little subjective too, but it's really just a signal that you give to the other person that you're in it to the end, that you're sitting down to have a conversation, and there may be some tension. There typically always is a little bit of tension when you're trying to communicate, even if it's just at a level of comprehension is where the tension lies. But what about when you're trying to communicate ideas, right? Say politically or spiritually or all these other charged ideas, you're going to have tension. And the thing is that if you hit a bump in the road, and you have a signal that, well, I'm not going to communicate unless it's roses and sunshine all the time, well, you're not going to be able to effectively communicate with very many people. In fact, what happens is you end up with an echo chamber around you, which is another prevalent common problem in today's society, as everyone's surrounded by their own echo chambers because they don't realize that this is a key ingredient if they ever want to have effective communication take place. And so it's really just a signal that you're in it to the end. And that end it's important to kind of define that because, if you're trying to communicate Shakespeare to a rock, like there's an end there pretty quickly you can notice, it's not going to happen. Sometimes people can act like rocks, right? So, you have to use your own best judgment and discernment of where that line is for you. But it certainly isn't at the first bump in the road. And this is what a lot of people believe it is at the moment there's a little offense or a little tension, is, I can't, I'm done, right? And it's like, well, so is communication. And then you'll never be able to effectively communicate with other people if you have that kind of viewpoint. And so incorporating this ingredient is really an essential ingredient. The final one, well, I'm sure there's lots more, but this is just the list that I think are key ingredients, is empathy and compassion. And this is an interesting one because, well, I have a story I want to tell you guys right after this point, but it's, you can generate a lot of what I would call social equity through virtue signaling in today's day and age, whether that's on Facebook posts or Twitter posts or Instagram, whatever it is, right? It's like, oh, look, I'm going to post this wonderful quote that shows what a loving, compassionate person I am that empathizes with these wonderful causes, which may be true, right? I'm not just trying to take that away from people, but that's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about empathy and compassion. I'm not talking about those things. What I'm referring to is in real time, being able to empathize with another individual that's not yourself. And this is very, very difficult often, especially if you haven't practiced this, because what happens how are you supposed to be expected to empathize with someone when you have significant, let's say, objections to their appearance or the way they dress or their beliefs or let's say their life choices, right? Let's say you have significant objections to those things. How are you really going to empathize with those kinds of people? And therefore, if you can't, how are you truly going to have the most effective form of communication with them? The short answer is you won't be able to, because to have effective communication, you must be able to empathize with them. And there's an important reason why. Because to be truly capable of empathizing with another being, you have to actually, you have to be able to look through their eyes. And it's more than that, than just looking through their eyes. It's looking through their eyes and feeling the emotions that they're feeling in real time as they're speaking back to you. And this is a very difficult thing to do. And I want to just give a real brief example here, which is this happened a couple of years ago, just for me, just to hopefully this illustrates this point a little bit better. But I realized that I thought I was pretty good at empathy up to a certain point. I'd been to mindfulness workshops. I'd done meditation. It's like I'm on the path, right? And so I thought that I just was doing that automatically, right? And a few years ago, the story goes that I was having a heated discussion with a friend, and we both were investing a significant amount of time and passion into a project. I mean, a lot of time and passion. We were both really interested in making it work. And we had, though, we were butting heads on a disagreement on the next step that we wanted to take. And, the details around it really aren't important. But the thing is that, as I was getting into the trying to communicate, and I had perseverance. I had that. I knew there was tension, but I was determined to get through to the other side because I was so passionate about actually realizing this project in the real world. And, but every time I thought that, I have a new observation or send a new message or communicate something else, it only made things worse. And I just really couldn't understand why. And, then something interesting happened. My friend asked me this question. He said, "Can you tell me what I'm thinking?" Or not thinking, I'm sorry, that's wrong. "Can you tell me what I'm feeling right now?" Those were his exact words. And my immediate response, is my ego. And I thought, of course I can. Trust me, I know how to do this. And so I thought for a second, and I said, sure. And I wagered a guess, because it really was only a guess, and I was wrong. And so it took me a little back because I thought I knew what he was feeling. And so I kind of rethought for a second, repackaged it, and said, well, maybe this is how you feel. I was wrong again. And that happened a couple more times. And what it really made me realize is that I thought that I was an empathetic person. But what I realized is, in fact, up to that point in my life, I had been incredibly narcissistic, because in my communication endeavor, I was only looking at it from the perspective on how whatever we're talking about made me feel. I never considered, well, maybe I considered how the other person felt, but I never attempted to really understand it. I never attempted to put myself in their shoes and feel what they were feeling, to then have that inform my own decision-making, my own communication patterns. And I had fooled myself, though, into thinking I was empathetic, and I wasn't. And it was really kind of a shock to me, because I thought I was. But you see, the trouble with doing this, and why probably most people don't do this, or they convince themselves they can, but they really don't, is because, think about it for a minute. To truly empathize with another person, it means, if only temporarily, that you're going to take on their emotional baggage as if it was your own. It means you need to experience their emotional condition as if it was yours, which, think about that. Screw that, right? Like I've got my own stuff, right? I got my own bags. What do I need someone else's junk on my plate? Like, oh, right. Well, who's that? What's that little mental thing that has that kind of response? That's the ego again, right? That's the part of me that got myself in trouble in the first place, thinking that I was already empathizing with other people. And then it's like, oh, now you start looking at it analytically, and you run into that issue again of the ego, which is like, ugh, gross. No, I don't want to do that. But the thing is that if you can do this, especially with people that you have disagreements with, people you despise, people you think that really are, say, maybe you think they're just terrible human beings, and there are terrible human beings in the world, but if you can truly empathize with where they're coming from, how they feel, it almost, it changes your communication to a point to where it almost becomes, there's like a magic that happens, because it changes the whole spectrum. The whole circuit changes, because you're able to take your space, your stuff, put it off to the side temporarily. You got your own emotions and how it makes you feel. And you create a space to look through their eyes and feel, and I don't mean like analytically feel, I mean in your body, feel, because that's what empathizing really means, what it is going on in their emotional being, and then feeling that, and then letting that inform you moving forward. The moment you can do that, it's like something magical happens. And there's, I don't have time to go into some of the techniques you can apply from this. And there's some really powerful ones, because this is more interpersonal, what you can do with these kind of stuff interpersonally moving forward. But just knowing about that and kind of thinking about that in your everyday life can go a long way. And especially if you try and apply it to other people, and not just people you like. That's easy, right? People you like, it's easy to agree with. It's easy to put yourself in their shoes. Try and put yourself in someone's shoes you hate. And, it's okay to hate people. I hate people, right? It's like, well, hate maybe is a strong word, but greatly dislike maybe, right? That's okay. We don't get along. But, it's like being able to do that, it's a key that can unlock some really powerful things in creating effective communication. So what's the secret? What's the secret of all these kind of factors if we combine them all? Well, there's actually one final thing that informs and makes all of these ingredients, I would throw it out there, like 10 times is all of them. It multiplies them. And as far as if you apply these different ingredients to communication, if you do this other thing, it makes all of them better substantially. And maybe you've experienced someone who's doing this. In this, if you've had the experience, it's like you meet somebody and there's it's like they're emanating something. It's just being around them. It's like they have a pull, and it's not like they're doing anything. They're not lassoing you and pulling you in, right? It's just by being in their presence, there's something about that feels good, that makes you feel good. And so you want to be in their presence more often. They may not even be saying anything like revolutionary or mind-bending or anything like that. It's just by being close to them, it has that effect. And can anyone guess what that factor might be? Or anyone, just look real briefly here in the chat. Has anyone had that experience with other people and can guess what it is that person is doing that creates that kind of ambience, that creates that kind of pull to people towards them? I might be delayed, so it's probably not this was just a guess to see if this would work on the live stream in the chats, but maybe, after the fact in the Q&A. But the thing is there is a factor, and the factor is positive. Okay, so we're just delayed. True, it is positivity is definitely a good thing. VP has it over in the YouTube chat. Yeah, VP, you've got it, 100%. And EC, heart rate, is definitely associated with it. The secret to all of these things, and it's corny as hell to me, it's love. It's, but it's different though. Like your first impression might be love. Wait a minute, what? It's not love as an emotion, because it's not what they're doing. And emotion, I mean, is like, you love your partner or parents or children. Yeah, I'm not talking about that. What I'm referring to is love as an attitude, which is very different than love as an emotion. It's a state of being that you can create and hold. And it's, you can kind of imagine, the metaphor is like, imagine yourself as a beacon for it. As you move around in the world, everything that your eyes land on, you have this intent in your mind that whatever you look at, whatever your eyes drape across, you are sending love through it. It's like your attitude of your expression is that thing. And it's something that actually is not nonverbal. It's not verbal. It's not a visualization. And it's also not something written. It's something else. And this is actually what comes out of the scientific research that I wanted to briefly share with you guys at HeartMath, because there's actually research behind this of why this phenomenon occurs. And so I want to actually tell you guys about this, is that the HeartMath, well, just a little bit about what they are, is that HeartMath is a nonprofit research organization with numerous independent peer-reviewed studies. They work closely with large healthcare providers, law enforcement, first responders, military, and the like, things like that. And they do a lot of research on how an individual can handle incredibly stressful situations and still keep coherence within their being and tackle those types of scenarios that these healthcare providers, law enforcement, first responders would need to be able to handle. And they take it to the lab to kind of figure out how they can look at the body, what it's doing, and then use that to our advantage. And here's 3 things that their research has shown. Number 1 is that every time the heart beats, it creates a magnetic field that's produced and travels out from the body, which can be measured up to 3 feet away. That's number 1. The brain actually does this as well, but it's like a small little field, about an inch off the skull. But the heart is something, imagine that. You have like these bubbles around you that you're creating all the time, every point of the day. Second thing in the research shown is that your thoughts, attitudes, and emotions create different patterns that are broadcast into this magnetic field. So that's number 2. Number 3 is that these attitudes and emotions that you have that you're broadcasting into the field, they can affect other people in the local environment, irregardless of nonverbal cues. So you could be on the other side of a wall. What they've shown, they have done laboratory double-blind experiments where they'll put people on one side of the wall, another side of the other, and they have no idea what they're doing. They'll tell one person to do certain techniques, and it affects the magnetic field that's created in the person right next to them on the other side of the wall, because the magnetic field will go through a wall. And so, really what this means is that it's not just this, this spiritual mumbo jumbo thing. It's like, just be love, right? It's like, yes, but there's actual scientific backing of why this is important. It's because it has to do with the body. Now, I'm certain that there's more to it. This is just one aspect that we can measure, right? Is this magnetic field. But your emotions, what you're thinking about, your positivity, as you look at the things out in the world, as you move through the day, that's going to infect your environment physically with these energetic fields. And so if you hold that in your internal space, it will actually incredibly affect your communication. So I had just one other graph here I wanted to show you, this is their ECG frequency spectrums. It shows the heart on the left here is when someone is holding appreciation. They're holding that in their center of their being. And this is what it creates in the magnetic field, essentially, is there's a high level of coherence. And then you have some person who's frustrated, notice the level of coherence. It's not coherent. It's just sporadic and ugly looking, right? So it affects people in your local environment. And they found one kind of other interesting thing is that those that are in an incoherent state are naturally attracted to people who are in a coherent state. And because it feels good, what happens is the incoherent magnetic field that's being produced by the heart starts to match the coherent one. And that it makes them start feeling things of whatever is in the other field. In this example, the appreciation, right? But it also can be that of love. And that's like really the highest, if you have a spectrum or a tonal scale kind of a thing, you put love up there at the top, right? If that's what you're emanating, that's what the other person is going to be feeling on a nonverbal level. And so that's the amplifier, if you will. And then if you know that, that can really influence positively the communication that you're trying to exert throughout your day. So what I want to do now, since we might go a little bit over, but that's okay if you guys can hang around. I do want to show you this technique, so I had to jump over a couple things here, which is a heart-based inner communication technique. I've talked a little bit about communication, how it works on the outer world, as well as how it works in some of the pitfalls on the inner world. I want to actually now give you a technique that you can use every day if you want. And I actually would recommend, give yourself a month trying this technique every evening. Because what it's going to do is it takes the feedback mechanism that we know is required for effective communication to occur, and it puts it into a very simple practice that you can apply that essentially can improve the quality and effectiveness, productivity, a whole bunch of other things. You'll see in just a minute as you go about your day. So I want to jump into the specifics. The first step in this technique is very simple. All you have to do is you can get a pad or a piece of paper and a pen, and you're going to create 2 columns on the page. In the left-hand column, which you're going to fill out first, at the very top, you write the word achievements. And under that column, you're going to list any achievement that you had in that during the day. I like to do this at night, but whatever felt like a win. And it really doesn't matter how big or how small it was. You write it down in that column. So it's like, I got up a little earlier today, and so I was less stressed getting to work because I did that. Okay, that's a win. And so you list all of your wins for the day in a column, as many as you can, and be generous with yourself. There is no too small of a win. And you write them all down in one column. The next thing you do in this step is you then write in the other column failures, and you be brutally honest with yourself. And these are the things that you feel did not have the outcome that you wanted at the end of the day. Maybe you forgot to do something. When I was putting this slide deck together, I ran out of time. It's something simple. I just wanted to do my laundry that day. This was like a couple days ago now, but I just ran out of time. I just didn't work out. I was a little frustrated because it means I had to wake up earlier and get it done. So that would have been like a failure, right? So it can be simple things. Maybe it was something larger. Maybe it was you had a really negative communication with somebody and you just didn't do your best in it. And so you just be brutally honest about what are the failures for the day. And so you have 2 side-by-side lists. That's the first part of the step. First step. The next step is we're going to do something specific with the first column, the achievements column. What we're going to do is we're going to relive those experiences in our inner imaginary, or it's like almost like you're daydreaming a little bit is what you do, when you kind of reminisce on a memory, something that happened. That's all you're going to do, but you're going to do it with a high level of intent and focus. And you do it on 3 different levels. What you do is you take the very first one off the top of the list on achievement, and I like to close my eyes. It's a little bit more helpful, a little easier to do it. And I'll start with number 1, the physical level of experience of that memory, that achievement, that win. So, that would be recreating the place that it occurred, the people who were there, the sounds, the smells of the environment. You try and make it as vivid as you can through all the different senses. That's the first goal, is like create a clear inner picture about what that win looked like. The second thing you do is you then bring in the emotional level of experience. Okay, here's the facts, right? Here's what it is. Now, how was I feeling when this occurred? And typically, if it's a win, you probably felt good, at least on some level about it. Maybe, higher intensity on some and lower on others. But bring back the emotional level and relive the feeling of what that was like to have a win. It's like, yes, I got into work earlier today. I was able to make it to the coffee shop on time and beat the line. Oh, that just felt good. Bring in the emotional level of experience next. And then the third level is you're going to move to the mental level of experience. And what you do here is, now that you've created this picture, physical and emotional, imagine, if you will, I like to put like a white ball of light around it. It's like we're working with metaphor and imagination, so it's fine. But say the imaginary experience, you put a white ball of light around it and you move it to the center of your heart. And the heart is important here because it's the aspect of yourself. It's a highway or a gateway into the inner level of experience, to the higher self. So you take that win in high, vivid detail and you put it right there in that channel into the heart. And with intention, this is the mental level, you intend and send an intent there. I like to sub-vocalize it even. And I say this. I say specifically, referring to the experience, the win, this is a success. I would like to have more of these. Again, speaking to my inner self. Please make this happen in ways that are for my highest good and the highest good of everybody else. And so it's like you're anchoring that feeling. And the final step I like to do is a very simple breathing technique where it's not an in-breath, like a, breathing in, because, what do you do when you're taking a big, deep breath? That's like I'm preparing for something, you need to lift something heavy. What do? All right, here we go. We're going to lift the thing, move the piano. That's not what we want to engage. That's not the signal we want to send. We want to send the end signal. We want to send the relief signal to the body through the heart. So it's actually an out breath. So we sub-vocalize, we put the imaginary experience into our heart, and we breathe out. You can take a breath in a little bit first, but don't take a big one in. Just take a regular breath in and breathe out with intent, like relief. Because when you finish a hard task at the end of the day, you breathe that sigh of relief. And that's what you're going to recreate as a signal to the unconscious. I like to hold the breath out. So I'll breathe out, hold it for a few seconds, and then I'll move on to the next one in the achievement list. And so what you do is you repeat these steps for every single achievement on that list. And what you're doing is you're anchoring the wins in the unconscious, and you're telling it with high vivid detail, with high intent, this is what I would like to happen. I want more of this. Help me, assist me with more of things like this. That's a very intentional type of communication. But you're also giving it feedback in a number of different ways through the body and the various levels of experience. Now, that's not the end though. The very last step is you need to handle the failures column as well, because this is another part of the feedback for the unconscious. Is while you need to give it, acknowledgement, yes, this was right, this is where you did good, you also need to give it acknowledgement, here's what's not working, here's what I would like to see changed, but you do it in a very specific way. Instead of reliving, right? That's not what you want to do. Your goal is not going to be, I'm just going to go relive these terrible things that happened today. Instead, you're going to do something different. You take the first one on the top of the list, on the failures list. For me, it was, let's say, something simple, right? It was the laundry. And what you do is you recreate, you reimagine a new experience of how you would have liked it to have occurred rather than how it actually occurred. And you use the same principles. You start in the physical, then on the emotional, and then you send it there and anchor it with your intent in the heart. So the example is with the laundry, right? Something simple. I would, in my imaginary experience, I would reimagine myself in the physical world first, right? So I'd see the hamper, I'd see the fabric, the colors. I would see myself over at the actual, washing machine, right? I would see it all happening, create that imaginary experience first, the physical level. Next, I would bring in the emotional level. And the emotional level would be something like, well, I feel relaxed, right? I feel like I have enough time, that I don't feel stressed getting to this. And so that's the emotion that I would want to have happened, right? And maybe even more than just relaxed, maybe I even bring in create in my imaginary experience gratitude. And this is kind of relevant to me because I lived in New York for a number of years, and I didn't have a washer dryer unit in my apartment in New York. I had to walk 3 blocks with my laundry on my back and go do it down there. So whether it was raining or snowing or whatever it is, I had to travel just to go do laundry. So the fact that it's such a simple thing, right? The fact that I can do laundry just literally down the hall, it brings gratitude every time. I mean, not every time, but I'd like to say it does every time. But I can bring that into my imaginary experience, right? And it can help create a highly vivid experience. And so that's the physical, then the emotional, and then the final step is the mental level. And in that, I'm now going to encapsulate this imaginary experience with a ball of white light, move it to my heart, and with intention, I'm going to basically sub-vocalize into my inner self. I'm going to sub-vocalize the words of, this is the way I would have liked things to have occurred, and how I would like things to occur in situations similar to it in the future. Please let this happen in ways that are for the highest good of myself and all concerned. So really what you're doing is you're saying, unconscious, okay, yes, you're observing, you're acknowledging there was the failure, right? But you're not going to go deep down and go into that hole, right? Instead, you're going to be productive. You're going to communicate to the unconscious. It's easier to find a problem than it is to have a solution for it, right? Has anyone heard that before? And it's like what our goal with the inner dialogue is, we're finding a solution for the unconscious. And the unconscious will get it, especially if you present it in these ways, at the physical, emotional, and mental. And so you're saying, this is the way I would have liked it to have happened. And in the future, please use this almost as like a blueprint, as a map for the way I would like things to occur. And then you communicate that to the unconscious mind, and then anchor it there, do that out breath at the end, and then move on to the next one in the list. And so that is the exercise. Essentially, if you do, I like do this at the end of every day, like take a month or a couple weeks and just set aside, 15 minutes if you can. It's difficult, I know, sometimes if you have a busy life, and try this. Because what you'll actually find is that your wins, if by doing this, simply by putting your attention on these things and communicating through this inner dialogue technique to the unconscious, you'll find that your wins list gets bigger, typically. And you'll find the failure list starts to gradually shrink. Now, there is something that can occur that you may see the same failure over and over and over and over again. And that's indicative of that you have a subconscious sabotage or a blocker that exists at a root level that needs to be taken care of. But so this kind of technique isn't, I would say, the right one to tackle those, but it's useful in the way that it can let you know that they're there, and becoming conscious, becoming aware of where subconscious sabotage occurs is incredibly helpful, because what it does is it lets you know that, hey, this is something you need to take care of. And so in other classes I'll be holding, in other workshops, I'm going to be showing techniques on how you would address those kind of things. But in this is just a very simple practice to begin dialoguing, begin a rapport with the inner self, and then communicate how you would like it to work with you to bring alignment to your conscious intent, and then alignment on its end when it's kind of communicating and it's giving you the drive, it's giving you the spontaneous ideas. The unconscious mind plays a big role in manifesting and creating the things that are around you in your life. And so by beginning this kind of dialogue, you start showing it with intention what you want. And it's a lot more effective than those New Year's resolutions, let me tell you. So anyway, that's the end of the exercise. And so just for the last couple minutes here, what I really just want to quickly go over here is just share with you guys a little bit about what I'm doing next. This masterclass, what I share with you guys tonight, is really just the beginning of a journey. And it's the first steps in, I spent the past decade investigating a lot of different techniques, studying under a lot of different mentors that showed me how to apply inner techniques in my outward life. And also, you can apply this kind of stuff tonight in your interpersonal communication as well. But it's like the journey next that kind of comes after this is, okay, well, what do we do with this knowledge? What do we do with these avenues of communicating with the inner self? And how can we apply them in our lives to attract the life that we want to live, the people that we want to share it with? And it can be in a number of different areas. You can focus this on your career. You can focus this on your relationships with loved ones or your intimate relationships, or you can even focus this on your health and your well-being. It's really up to you how you want to apply these techniques. But it's really once you bring the levels of the self into alignment, the inner level and the conscious level, that's when the magic really begins to happen. Because what occurs is you start synchronistic events just start happening in your life. You start attracting people to you that help you with you be successful in the things you want to be successful with, the things that you're passionate about. When you have laser-like focus on this communication line, it's almost like the things you want to bring into your life, it's almost like they could not happen, because you're such high clarity and such high alignment on all different aspects of yourself. And that's really where this journey goes, is learning those techniques to understand and then practically apply those in the places you want to be successful in your life. And so, in this masterclass, it was really just to kind of get a taste. What is it like? What is effective communication? How can we begin to start doing that with our inner self? But what's next is essentially taking it to the next level and applying it very, very specifically towards things you want to create in your life. And so with that, as at the end, what I kind of want to share with you guys and invite you guys all to join me on is not this Saturday, but next Saturday, I'm hosting a day-long workshop online. It's a live stream workshop where I will be covering 4 different steps on how to actually attract and manifest positive outcomes in your life using these types of techniques. And it begins in the early morning. We're going to talk about the imaginary experience, which you got a little taste of tonight, which is how to harness your dominant method of perception, as well as strengthening weaker modalities. And so it's like really making those visualizations in your imagination and really anchoring them to the highest level of detail. And there's a whole about 2-hour lecture that I go into there about how that works and how you can effectively incorporate practical strategies to level that up much more advanced than what I've covered here tonight. So that's the beginning of the workshop. Second part of the workshop I'll be discussing is how to locate your inner anchor point. And this is, you can think of, a little bit more advanced than just directly dealing with the heart. Again, you take that to the next level. Much more powerful techniques come out of that process. It's essentially, it still relies on that feedback mechanism though of communicating and dialoguing with the inner self. Third part of the class or the workshop in the afternoon, we'll be switching over to how to successfully outpicture intent. And this is, again, you got a little taste of it in this workshop, this masterclass tonight, the idea of communicating with specific intent through a list, achievements and failures. But there's actually even better ways to do this, and ones that are more specific. If you change your goals into like laser-like intent to where it's almost like you become a magnet for them in your life, and that things just start showing up because you're able to prioritize, because you have the alignment, you're able to dialogue with the inner self and share what you want it to do along with you, share what your intent with it. So we'll be covering that in the afternoon. And then finally, to wrap the day up, I talked about this at the very end, but it's important because you can have all of those other things and you can know how to do them. You can be great at imaginary experience. You can have an inner anchor point. You can even be really good at being with laser-like focus on what you want to achieve. But if you don't know how to handle subconscious blockers, things that may have existed because of previous experiences in your life or past failures. There's a whole host of reasons of the reasons that these could exist. But if you don't know how to handle those kinds of things, there's an inherent barrier or ceiling that's going to prevent how successful you can be with these kind of techniques. Because they'll certainly come up to the surface. They'll certainly make themselves known once you start creating an inner dialogue. Like, hey, I'm here. You need to deal with me. But if you don't have the techniques or the strategies on how to do that successfully and simply, I find, you need practical tools, then you'll never be able to kind of push through the plateau to the next level. And so that's what the final part of the workshop is going to be about. It's going to be about dealing with unconscious blockers, practical ways on how to not only release them, to dissolve them, but also how to turn them around to even get your unconscious to work for you. So it's almost like you're imprinting the unconscious to say, this is actually how I want you to work in the future. And there's a couple of advanced techniques to show you on that end as well. So anyway, the name of this workshop is going to be Deep Intuition. It's happening next Saturday, and you can actually sign up for it over on my website, which is technicalintuition.com. And for a short time, I had a couple emails who were asking, because I had a webinar last week specifically on intuitive techniques, but they're asking if I might be able to extend the promotion just one more time after this webinar before the workshop. So I have decided to go ahead and do that. So that means if you guys are interested in joining me on this journey to learn these new techniques, to begin applying them practically in your life, because you signed up tonight for a reason. There's a reason that these communication techniques essentially, something inside you responded to it. If you feel that this is the next step for you to learn these techniques, join me next weekend. I'm going to extend the discount for this weekend only. To sign up for the class, it's $399, but I'm going to take $100 off for everyone here in the webinar if you guys want to join me for the day. So it'll be $299, and you can get that discounted price for the next 48 hours, again, if you use at checkout the promo code webinar. And so you just go to technicalintuition.com, promo code webinar, and you'll get that discount. And there was a question about whether or not the actual whole day would be recorded. Yes, it will be recorded. So even if you're only able to show up for the morning, but you can't actually attend the afternoon, everyone who signs up will get an HD recording and access to the full class. So even if you miss one of the sections, you'll actually have the full printout, the worksheets, the whole 9 yards, as well as an HD recording of it as well that you can refer back to anytime. So anyway, that's what's coming up. I'm really excited about sharing, kind of going, I have to like incorporate so much information in these, like even here, I'm over time on this masterclass tonight, but it's, if you really want to take these techniques to the next level and apply them practically in your life, then definitely sign up and join me for this, because I'm going to be teaching some very powerful techniques, not just things that I've read, not just things that I've heard about. These are things that I've taught and then applied practically in my own life. And these are the kind of things where, whether it's in career, I've used these techniques to generate a lot of money in a short amount of time with laser-like intent, aligning inner aspects of myself. And then it's like synchronistic things just start happening, where in just a couple of days left, suddenly the money shows up and I'm able to actually go ahead and do the thing. And so it's a very powerful technique, but it's not just money or career. You can also use it in relationships. You can use it in health, a bunch of different things. It's really whatever your goals are in life. It's taking those and it's creating like a laser pattern of what those are, and then projecting out your intent with your inner and unconscious mind, your higher self, all in alignment with those to manifest those in your life. And so I know these works. I wouldn't be teaching them if I didn't really believe in them. And so if this interests you, definitely sign up. I'm going to be interested to share these more advanced strategies with you guys. So anyway, I'm going to wrap that up here. Thanks all, wherever you guys are around the world. Have a good night, or good morning, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care. Good night, everyone.